Grace and peace to all of citizens and families who are worshiping God today at your home or here in this place. Today's text is about Good Shepherd in John chapter 10. And today's message is especially for those who will serve our church in this year as leaders and Sunday school teachers. But I'm sure that this message will be applied to all of you, each and every one of you. Throughout today's text, we are going to look at who the Good Shepherd was, and what are the characteristics of that Good Shepherd. So there are three characteristics we can find today's text. It's number one, sacrifice. Number two, relationship. Number three, concern. Number one, sacrifice. The first characteristics of a good shepherd is sacrifice. Could you turn this? Thank you. Shall we read verse 11? If you read verse 11, it says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Jesus introduced himself as a good shepherd. And he speaks of the first characteristics of the good shepherd, that is to lay down his own life for the sheep. The good shepherd sacrifices his own life to protect the sheep from danger. Even if he gave up his own life, he never gives up the sheep. On the other hand, what about the hired hand? Verse 12, he says, he who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. A hired hand is not a shepherd, but a paid worker. So when a wolf or beast approaches, he abandons the sheep and runs away. To a hired hand, his own life is more precious than the lives of the sheep. His purpose is the money he gets through the sheep. Sheep are just a means of achieving that goal. How many people are like this hired hand are around us? Maybe your manager, boss at your company or school or professor can treat you sometimes as means, not as purpose. They may like your function, what you can do for them, more than your existence and being. Teachers can also show favoritism on students who study well and have good grades. What about pastors, ministers? Even among pastors, how often do they treat the church members as a means of their fame, recognition, achievement, not as a purpose? If so, pastors can also become hired hands. What about parents? Do we not see all this through the case of child abuse on an adopted child, Jung-in? In some cases, the purpose of adoption is to receive the honor, recognition, and praise from people, or any other benefit you can earn from that child, not for the benefit of the child. Would it be different if they are your own born child? When I was in charge of the elementary children ministry at Usan Church, there were some girls sexually abused by their own father. Maybe we think we are much better than those people. However, aren't we sometimes more pleased and boasting about our children's performance or function rather than their being? When we love their function more than their beings, when we use people as a mean rather than an end and purpose, we too can become these hired hands. However, Christ, our good one and only true good shepherd, is different. He loves your very being and existence and see you as an end and purpose. Christ does not treat you as a means for his own purposes. He does not ask you to offer money because his bank balance is lacking, and he does not ask you to evangelize people because there are not enough people in his kingdom. Rather, he sacrifices himself for the benefit of you. Lots of shepherds in the world tell you to serve them and sacrifice you for their sake. But Christ says he will serve you and sacrifices himself for our sake. And that sacrifice is a voluntary sacrifice. Shall we read verse 18? Verse 18 says, "No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father." Christ's sacrifice for the sheep is not because of fear or by force, though Christ, who is God, has full authority over his own life, but he himself gives up that authority. He is willing to lay down his life for the sheep. He gives up his own life, not the lives of the sheep. And I would like to introduce with a remarkable story of Pastor Yang Won-son. Today, though it seems there are many pastors like hired hands in Korean churches, including me, but there are still many pastors like good shepherds. Pastor Son is one of the most respected pastors of Korean church history, who practiced love enough to adopt the enemy who had killed his own two sons. He was serving patients with leprosy or Hansen's disease in Yeosu and Yangwon. When most of South Korean land was occupied by the Communist Army of North Korea at Korean War in 1950, the church was also closed and people had to evacuate. However, Pastor Son did not evacuate, but he remained at the church until the end and kept the church. Rather, he himself became an instructor, a speaker, and continued to hold a Bible conference at his own church. However, due to the eager request of the church officers, church members, leaders for him to leave, he held a farewell service with church family and he got on a boat. But after singing the last hymn on the boat, the pastor suddenly jumped off the boat with his bag alone. When the congregation asked him, "Pastor, why are you not evacuating?" he replied, "How glorious you would be to die in the name of the Lord. And what about the 1,000 flocks of sheep that I evacuate? If I evacuate and leave the church, what would be different than killing them if I leave them behind?" He stubbornly refused to evacuate and sent only the officers. Eventually, Pastor Son was arrested by the Communist Army and was killed by gunshot. Isn't his confession inspiring and challenging us today? He said, "What will happen to the flock if I leave?" This is the true confession of the good shepherd. In particular, these days are the times when shepherds leave and abandon their own sheep. How many times do the parents leave and abandon his children? Teachers leave students, and pastors leave the church for their own interest. However, the shepherd must not leave the sheep. Someone who is called, someone who has calling from God, should stay in the land of that calling. No matter what danger or crisis comes, no matter what wolves or beasts come, the shepherd must be with the sheep and protect the sheep from danger. Dear parents, who are the shepherd of the children, no matter what happens, do not give up your children or your family. Dear church leaders and teachers, do not give up your own flock of life group members or Sunday school students. Whatever your callings are, please keep the place of that calling, the sheep that God has entrusted to you. In fact, As before, while I prepared today's sermon, I had to preach this message to myself several times and made a promise and commitment to myself. Pastor Shin, you should not give up the sheep no matter what. No matter how injured, how dangerous you are, what kind of damage you will suffer, even when you are really afraid of something, maybe failure or risk of something, even when you want to sometimes run away because of the hardship, you should never leave the ship. You must sacrifice yourself for the benefit of the ship, not sacrificing the ship for your benefit. A shepherd is a person who sacrificed himself for the sheep. I pray that all of you will be voluntarily and joyfully sacrificing yourself for the sheep that God has entrusted to you by following Christ, the great and good shepherd. And number two, relationship. The second characteristic of the good shepherd is relationship. The shepherd has a close relationship with the sheep. Verse 14 says, I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. The hallmark of a deep and intimate, close relationship is knowing each other very well. Not only the shepherd knows the sheep very well, or the sheep only knows the shepherd well, but the shepherd and the sheep knows each other very well. And verse 15 says, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Just as the Father knows the Son, and the Son knows the Father, they know each other based on their intimate relationship. And the relationship between the shepherd and the sheep should be such close relationship. Actually, we don't understand quite well this because we never raised a sheep. However, the Jews who had raised a sheep knew this very well. It's like telling Korean men about the story of the army or about soccer. And at the time, the shepherd took his sheep to search for grass to the field from place to place. And then in the evening, when the sun goes down, the sheep are put inside the pen to protect them from various dangers. But in that pen, various sheep of various shepherds are mixed with each other. They are together. Different groups are together. Among these mixed flocks, how does the shepherd find his own sheep? It's very simple. Shepherd calls out their sheep, like Joy, Nari, Kuya Daniel, Kuya Joseph, Brother Joseph. Then the sheep listens to their shepherd's voice and come out of the pen and to their shepherd. The sheep have good hearing, so they can distinguish their shepherd's voice and respond only to that shepherd's call. No matter how many other shepherds call, Joy, Nari, they will answer, who are you? I don't know you. I don't know who you are. It's like everyone's experiencing of parking your own car in a large shopping mall parking lot and looking for it, right? I often parked and forgot where I parked the car. However, I don't worry because there's a smart key that's if you send the signal and you can find it easily. I actually forget things very well, as you know. I forget easily people's name and lose things often. There have been many times when I went to the airport and didn't bring my passport several times. Fortunately, I don't forget my wife. But I don't worry. Even if I forget my wife, I don't have to worry because there will be only one person to answer when I call honey or darling. If there's another person who answers, there will be a big problem. Likewise, no matter how many cars there are in the parking lot, only one car will respond to the signal that I sent. The same goes for the sheep. The sheep respond only to the voice of their own shepherd, no matter who calls. It is also like a child who recognizes the voices of their mommy or daddy among many children. On one day, on my day off, I went to a daycare center to pick up my son, Logan. At that time, even before I calling my son's name, he recognized, he heard my voice and said, "Daddy." Will only children know their parents' voices? Parents also recognize their own child's voice. When one of the many children cries, parents immediately figure out if that is their child's voice or not. Just as parents and children know each other's voice very well, the shepherd and the sheep recognizes each other, their voice very well. Shepherd knows the sheep well, and sheep knows the shepherd well. And that should be our relationship with our good shepherd, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, the good shepherd, knows you very well. Just like the song that we just sang, He knows my name. He knows my every thought. He sees each tear that falls and hears me when I call. He knows your pain, your heart, your tears, your thoughts very well. He knows who you are. He knows what you like most. He knows when you feel really happy and what you need. And there are even times he answers, he provides what you need, even before you didn't ask for that. Sometimes it's amazing to see mothers raising their infant baby. They sound all the same to me, but the mother knows whether the baby is crying because he's hungry or feels sleepy, or if the diaper should be exchanged. It's so amazing. I didn't know that well with my first child, Hari, but with the second child, I could tell how. I could tell. And how? Unlike the first child, I was able to spend a lot of time with my second daughter. If you spend a lot of time with your child and have intimate relationship, you can know it. There is no other way. You have to spend lots of time. You have to endure and have intimate relationship. Likewise, the relationship between our good shepherd, Jesus Christ, and us, the sheep, are the same. Do you know your shepherd well enough, as much as he knows you? Can you distinguish among his voice among all other voices from the world? Whenever you have a negative or depressed or bad thought in your mind, if media tells you something, if somebody else tells you something, and sometimes you hear some negative thoughts from your own heart, can you recognize and say, "Oh, this is not the voice of my shepherd that I know"? Who are you? Who is talking to me? Can you recognize his frequency, his voice? To distinguish his voice well, you have to spend a lot of time and quality time with him. Through the life of meditating God's word and pray, you can have a personal and intimate relationship with him. The same applies to our relationship with people. How much and deeply do you know your child if you are a mom? How well do you understand the members of the life group and the students in your class in Sunday school or in your academy? Those who are appointed as leaders and teachers today, above all, I encourage you to try to get to know the sheep entrusted to you. Knowing someone is different from knowing about someone. It is not simply knowing objective information about that person, but knowing that person personally and about inner self, about joy and pain, strength and weaknesses well. To do that, we have to spend a lot of time and quality time with each other. And that is why sometimes pastors visit you, calls you, not to get some information about you, but to build an intimate relationship. And in the same way, I encourage the leaders and the teachers of City Center Church to try hard to have a close relationship with your own members, your sheep that God has entrusted to you. And number three, the third and final feature is concern. The good shepherd is concerned not only with the sheep inside the pen, but also with the sheep outside the pen. Verse 16 says, "And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd." You see, now Jesus is telling us that there are other sheep that are not of this fold, meaning outside the pen. And they should also become one flock with under one shepherd. They needs to be united as one flock. Who are they that Jesus talking about here? The other sheep that are not of this fold at the time of Jesus were expressions referring to Gentiles, foreigners. The Israelites or Jewish people were regarded as God's chosen people. They were people in the covenant, inside the covenant, in the blessing, while the Gentiles were regarded as outsiders, those who are out of God's covenant blessing. They are outsiders. However, our good shepherd was concerned not only with the insiders, but also the outsiders. John chapter 11, verse 42 also tells us that purpose, that heart of the good shepherd. It says, "And not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad." Dear brothers and sisters, who is our good shepherd, Jesus Christ? He loved not only the Jews, but also Gentiles alike. He is a good shepherd not only for the nation of Israel, but also for all nations. Do you remember to whom Christ visited and served? He went to the Jews, but also he went to those who were discriminated at the time and marginalized at the time. He went to the Gentiles and to the Samaritans who were more despised than the Gentiles. He was more interested in outsiders by social standards at the time, including the sick, demon-possessed, sinners, and tax collectors. He loved the outsiders and the people who didn't receive much attention or concerns. Why is Jesus saying this right now in John chapter 10? At the time, when the Jews heard this, they were really shocked. Why? It is because the Jews at the time were filled with ethnocentrism called Judaism. So it was really hard for them to accept that Jesus was not only a good shepherd for the Jews, but also for the Gentiles. And Jesus knew their hearts really well. And he's now pointing out their narrow worldview. He's trying to break their attitude of ethnocentrism, in which they identified with only those who shared the same ethnicity, language, religion, or history. However, it's not just the messages that are relevant and applicable only to those who lived about 2,000 years ago. It is the same word of God to you and me today. Dear brothers and sisters of City Center Church, what about us today? How far is your interest or concern reaching? Wouldn't you also be more interested in people who share the same ethnicity, the same language, the same history and culture as you, especially those of the same religion, Christians? Do you have the same interest in the sheep outside of the pen who you think different from you? Do you associate with them? As you know, our church is a multicultural community where people from various backgrounds, including nationality, language, culture, and profession, form a family together. Even if in a monocultural church community, there are always people who are different from you and who do not match with you. Think about it. How can you go out into the world and show Christ, who is our good shepherd, if you hang out with only the people from the same background or origin, people who share the same ethnicity, culture, and people of the same social, financial status? Isn't this one of the reasons the church is being criticized today? Aren't they think, people outside, they think, oh, Christians, church members, they only hang out with among the church members, being close to each other, loving and serving each other, only among themselves. Thankfully, until now, our church has continued to practice God's love for the people living together in the city, especially non-believers. We have supported financially to the victims of wildfire in Goseong, Gangwon-do, and we reached out many families who are in need through Junggu Multicultural Welfare Center or Jungangdong Administrative Welfare Center. We have practiced the love of God to the neighbors in need, regardless of their religion. Last Christmas, especially, we even helped the families of single mothers in a facility which was run by the Buddhist Foundation. I was grateful that no one in our church objected to do so, but rather they welcomed and participated more actively. Beloved, the flock of City Center Church, do you have the gaze and interest of the Good Shepherd? I hope that your gaze, your attention, your interest does not stay only in the church, inside the church. The sheep in the pen are also very precious. But I hope that you will pay the same attention and interest to the sheep outside the pen, outside the church. They also need to become one flock with us, and they must belong to one good shepherd, Jesus Christ. Whenever there is something good, I'm so grateful that some of you take care of the ministers first and also take care of the brothers and sisters who are in our church, who are in need. But at the same time, please remember the sheep outside the pen who are wandering around because they have not yet found the good and true shepherd. They are still wandering outside, being exposed to the dangers from the beast. I know that some of you care about non-believing people and neighbors, and you try your best to connect, build relationship with them regularly. There are people who constantly contact people who are interested in the Christian faith and give gifts to them. And also there are people who give gifts to the marginalized, to unattended, to neighbors at Easter or Christmas time, and those who actively participate in the local community events. I'm so proud. I'm so thankful for all of you. The more you spend time with the sheep outside of us, with the concern and interest of the Good Shepherd, the more the world will see and can see Christ as a Good Shepherd through you. You are truly the ambassadors of the kingdom of God. You know what? There's one thing that the Korean church is doing so well. Maybe some of other churches will do the same. It is to tame believers as people of the church, not people of Christ. It is easy to tame them. You just need to keep calling them to come to church, to receive training, education, and again. That's it. You take their time to build a relationship with non-believing neighbors. If the sheep outside of the pen are first tamed as they come in and become insider, their relationship with other sheep that are still outside will automatically disconnect it. So the Korean church is doing this very well. Unfortunately, the longer you go to church, the more people around you are the believers. And the more time you spend with believers, the lesser you spend time with non-believers. Dear brothers and sisters, I hope you will also get the concern of the Good Shepherd. As much as you care about the needs within the church, inside the church, please pay attention to and actively participate in the issues, in the matters of your local communities and cities outside this church. When you care for brothers and sisters in your own life group, please also care for those who are outside of your group. We should go outside of our own group. However, it takes courage to do this. You need courage to do this because you have to go somewhere that is not comfortable and unfamiliar to you. You need to get out of your own comfort zone to reach the sheep outside the pen. Where does that courage come from? And of course, it comes from the gospel. What Christ has done for you. Then what did Christ really do for you? He himself was cast out of God's blessing by the curse and judgment of God. Though he was a perfect insider, but he became an outsider. He became the marginalized thoroughly because he was kicked out of his father's house and he was kicked out of the pen. You and I can now come into the pen, into the Father's home. This very gospel gives us the courage and confidence to go to the sheep who are still outside of us today. Dear brothers and sisters, and we will have a time for making a pledge for mission offering for this year. I encourage you to make commitment as much as you can do consistently and joyfully. And this mission offering will be used to serve the outer needs of the cities and the nation, not for the inner needs of this church. And if you think you are hesitating because in the middle of this year, maybe you have planned to go to other countries, you can do until your heart is pleased. Beloved brothers and sisters, you need courage to sacrifice yourself for the sheep outside of us. But Christ, the Good Shepherd, took even greater courage to sacrifice himself for me and you, who were Gentiles before, the sheep out of the pen. Why don't you try a little courage after Christ, following Christ, who showed us a great courage? And I will end my sermon today with a word from C.T. Studd. He says, if Jesus Christ be God and died for me, then no sacrifice can be too great for me to make for him. Whenever you feel like it's really hard to sacrifice myself for others, I hope you just to remember what kind of sacrifice Christ has showed for you. And continue to that, we will have this shortly time of appointment of leaders. In this year, 2021, we have leaders who will serve this year, throughout this year, or in the middle of this year. So I will just call out their names, and